The US dollar was supposed to be untouchable. For decades, it's been the backbone of global trade, the weapon America used to control the world. But now, China has just exposed a massive weakness, one that could bring the entire system crashing down. Donald Trump's trade war, his tariffs, his financial threats, they didn't make America stronger. The United States has always relied on one thing above all else to project power: the dollar. For decades, Washington has weaponized its currency to enforce sanctions, dictate global trade, and keep control over the financial system. But now, in 2025, that dominance is starting to unravel. And the country exposing this weakness most directly, China. This isn't just about tariffs, or trade wars, or some diplomatic spat. What Beijing has just revealed is a much bigger story. A systemic flaw in America's financial armor. And Donald Trump, the man who promised to put America first, may be the president who ends up watching the dollar's global supremacy slip away. The shock move last week. Chinese state media dropped a quiet but devastating announcement. Major state-owned banks, including the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, the Bank of China, and China Construction Bank, have suspended most new U.S. dollar transactions for cross-border clients. Instead, they are encouraging the use of the Chinese yuan, or in many cases, the euro. It wasn't a total ban, but it was a signal. Beijing is telling the world, we don't need the dollar anymore, and neither do you. Markets barely had time to digest the news before a ripple effect began. Southeast Asian commodity traders started pricing contracts in yuan. African energy firms began asking for payment in local currencies or Chinese RMB. And in Europe, whispers started spreading that dollar clearing was becoming riskier, not safer. What China exposed here wasn't just a preference for its own currency. It revealed that the dollar is no longer untouchable. The Trump tariff trap. How did we get here? The answer lies in Trump's trade war strategy. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he came with a mission: to reset the world order on America's terms. He slapped tariffs on allies and rivals alike. 25% tariffs on Japan, 40% tariffs on Chinese transshipped goods, 20% on Vietnamese exports. And now, he's threatening 100 nations with blanket duties unless they accept fair trade deals. The problem? By weaponizing trade, Trump forced countries to find ways to survive outside the U.S. system. And that means moving away from the dollar for decades. If you wanted to trade oil, cars, or steel, you needed dollars. But tariffs made dollar trade more expensive. So countries started experimenting with yuan settlements or even barter-style exchanges. Every tariff, every new restriction was like a hammer blow cracking the foundation of the dollar's supremacy. And now, China is taking advantage of the cracks. The rise of the yuan, let's be clear. For years, China has dreamed of replacing the dollar with its own currency, the yuan. But it struggled. The yuan was too tightly controlled, too mistrusted, too weak compared to the dollar. Global investors simply didn't want it. But in 2025, that changed. China launched a digital yuan settlement system that bypasses the U.S.-dominated SWIFT network. It signed massive trade agreements with Brazil, Saudi Arabia, and Russia that locked in yuan-based energy payments. And most importantly, it now has an incentive structure that makes using the yuan cheaper than using the dollar, especially for countries hit by Trump's tariffs. The numbers are staggering. In the last quarter alone, the share of Chinese trade settled in yuan jumped above 50%, a record. For comparison, just 5 years ago, that number was below 20%. By exposing the dollar as vulnerable to political manipulation, Trump may have given China the biggest gift imaginable: a chance to rewrite the global financial map. America's debt spiral, but the story goes deeper. It's not just about trade. It's about debt. America's national debt has exploded. In the first 10 months of Trump's presidency, $1.6 trillion was added. Every month, the Treasury needs to sell more bonds just to keep the government running. And who has been one of the biggest buyers of that debt for decades? China. But not anymore. Beijing has been dumping U.S. bonds at the fastest pace since 2011. It doesn't need them. And it doesn't trust them. Instead, China is reinvesting. In gold, euros, and its own Belt and Road Initiative. Every bond China refuses to buy forces the U.S. to find new buyers at higher interest rates. That means more expensive borrowing, more inflation pressure, and less global trust in the dollar. China has exposed a harsh truth. The U.S. cannot endlessly finance its deficits if foreigners stop believing in the dollar's safety. The global shift look around the world. The cracks are everywhere. Saudi Arabia, once America's closest oil partner, Riyadh is now accepting yuan for a growing share of its crude exports. Brazil, President Lula has openly called for an end to dollar dominance in trade with China. Russia. After Western sanctions, Moscow shifted nearly all of its trade with Beijing into yuan. Africa. Chinese infrastructure loans are increasingly denominated in yuan, not dollars. In every corner of the globe, the message is the same. The dollar is no longer the only option. And while the U.S. still holds enormous power, it's still the world's reserve currency, still the majority of global trade. The trend is undeniable. America is losing leverage, and China is gaining it. Trump's gamble, Donald Trump, campaigned on making America stronger. But what he may have done is accelerate the very decline he swore to prevent. By turning the dollar into a political weapon through tariffs, sanctions, and financial threats. He made the world search for alternatives. And now, those alternatives are becoming real. For decades, U.S. presidents knew the golden rule: protect the dollar at all costs. Because if the dollar falls, America's power falls with it. Trump broke that rule. And China was waiting. What happens next? What comes next? The answer is uncertainty and danger. If more countries join China in settling trade in yuan, demand for dollars will fall. If demand for dollars falls, the U.S. Treasury will struggle to finance its debt at low interest rates. If interest rates spike, America faces a debt crisis. And if America faces a debt crisis, its entire global military and economic machine begins to slow. This is not science fiction. It's already happening in small ways. In July 2025, the U.S. Treasury had a failed bond auction with weak foreign demand. That's a warning shot. Meanwhile, China is testing the waters with digital yuan cross-border payments in Africa and Asia. If it works at scale, it could bypass the dollar entirely. The nightmare scenario for Washington? A world where oil is priced in yuan, global reserves shift toward China, and the dollar loses its reserve currency status. It won't happen overnight. But every move Trump makes, every tariff he imposes, every threat he issues, it brings that future closer. America's dilemma. Here's the dilemma. If Trump backs down, he looks weak at home. If he doubles down, he pushes more countries into China's orbit. Either way, the U.S. is in a trap of its own making. The dollar's supremacy was never just about economics. It was about trust. Trust that America would be a stable, reliable partner. Trust that U.S. markets were open, predictable, and free. But under Trump, that trust is evaporating. Foreign investors see chaos. Allies see betrayal. And rivals see opportunity. China didn't create the dollar's vulnerability. It simply exposed it. And now, the world is watching to see if America can patch the cracks, or if the financial empire is already collapsing. Conclusion: the end of an era? For nearly 80 years, the U.S. dollar has been the backbone of the global economy. It survived wars, recessions, and crisis. But today, it faces its greatest test yet. China has made its move, and Donald Trump has made choices that accelerate the pressure. The question is no longer whether the dollar will remain dominant forever. It won't. The question is, how fast will it fall, and what will replace it? Because if the world no longer trusts the dollar, then the world no longer bows to Washington. And that would mark the true end of the American.